One, two, three. Hello everyone, my name is Juan Sebastián Gómez. I am a master's degree student in economics of public policy at Universidad del Rosario. Today I'm doing this presentation for the impact evaluation class, and my research proposal is titled "The higher the tree, the higher the fall. Does gender matter when punishing corrupt politicians?" This presentation will be divided in the motivation, the objectives of this proposal, a little bit of literature review, the context, and the experimental design or the identification strategy. At the end, I will present my data collection, where's my data coming from, and I hope this presentation fulfilled your expectations. So to begin, experimental research on gender and corruption has studied gender stereotype behavior, corroborating the traditional psychological hypothesis of intrinsic gender differences in corrupt scenarios. The problem is that the majority of experimental designs display survey or vignette experiments, or dictators and ultimatum games that have been of little help to understand subjects' behavior in punishing corruption, knowing the gender of the corrupt actor, mainly because the studies have not focused on gender differences in the corrupt actor. Only one experiment has studied if female politicians face higher standards when voters or citizens held politicians accountable, and it implemented a survey design that may draw participants to social desirable answers. So the relationship of voters' punishment to corrupt politicians actually has been studied from different perspectives, but none of those have questions if the gender matters, and I explain later why. Hence, the objective of this work is to study if gender matters for voters when punishing corrupt politicians. Therefore, my research question is, do voters punish corruption differently among genders? So, scholars have studied the importance, for example, of information access to voters in order to have well-informed electorate to curb down corruption. They have studied if the source of information matters, finding that voters will punish or at least negatively react if they have certainty about the accusation or they believe the source of information formulating the accusation is credible. Also, they have studied if partisanship effects in evaluations of corrupt politicians matter, and actually it does. Scholars have found that voters provide harder punishments to politicians from a party that is different than theirs, condoning to some degree within-party corrupt politicians. Last but not least, scholars have even studied the usage that politicians give to stolen funds and if that matters for how the voters punish them. They have found that people punish toughly politicians that use corrupt money for the enrichment rather than when they use it in actions such as vote buying or any other action of redistributive nature to the population. So, albeit these approaches have produced relevant insights of what matters to voters or citizens when punishing corrupt politicians or when deciding to which politician vote, a gender analysis is lacking. The goal of this work is to capture the gender differences of citizens' punishment on corrupt politicians. Here's a little bit of context of why the gender differences matter. Females are often perceived to be more honest, kind, passionate, and trustworthy. People often regard women with higher moral standards and think they behave in line with morality. The general perception of females regarded as more honest is even greater in males because they are more likely to hold benevolent sexist views towards their female counterparts, actually putting them in pedestals of moral superiority. In for instance, this might not seem something wrong, but the fact that people react negatively to stereotypical behavior might affect women because of the gender stereotypes, and specifically female politicians. What has been found with broad support indeed is that voters seeking for a more ethical and honest government are more likely to vote for a woman when she is running against a man. A wide body of research consistently finds that greater representation of women in public office or as public servants is correlated with lower levels of corruption, which led us to corroborate the honesty perception trait tied to females. Ezra Schwitz Bayer explore the mechanisms that make women behave with more honesty, and they have found that female politicians may be less corrupt because they believe that they face a more demanding scrutiny by voters. So the context here is not only voters and citizens perceive women or see women with a higher standard, but actually one of the things or one of the mechanisms that is drawing women to behave up to that standard is that they also feel that they face a more demanding scrutiny by voters. Finally, scholars have found consistent results of lower perceived corruption when there is more female representation in public office. With that being said, let's move to the Colombian context to see if these assumptions or these gender stereotypes apply. In the Corruption Perception Index, Colombia scores 36 points out of 100, where 0 is highly corrupt and 100 is very clean, showing that the perception of corruption in Colombia is quite high. Actually, 94% of Colombians perceive corruption as a big problem in their country, and that value is slightly above the mean for Latin America. 50% of Colombians respondents to the Americas Barometer believe corruption is very generalized, and 17% some believe that is somehow generalized. 91% of Colombians believe that at least half the politicians in the country get involved in corrupt transactions. 91% of the politicians get involved in corrupt transactions. So to this point, it is clear that to citizens, corruption is widespread amongst politicians. But here's the gender differences or the gender gap that corroborates the gender stereotypes and hypotheses shown previously by the literature. 71% of Colombians respondents to the Americas Barometer think that both genders are equally corrupt. That's perfectly fine. It is a really high value. Nonetheless, when seeing the differences between how many respondents believe that specifically male politicians are more corrupt, the percentage is 28%, while only 1% of Colombians think that female politicians are more corrupt. This is a gap of 27%, which shows or helps to corroborate the gender traits and gender stereotypes hypothesis. So, to study or to answer my research question, does gender matter when punishing corrupt politicians, I propose the following randomized controlled trial with this experimental design. In Colombia, there are 1,103 municipalities, with only 12% of them with a female mayor. We have a huge gap in political representation of women, and the gender gap in political participation is astonishing. Only 12% of women, of mayors in Colombian municipalities are women. So to study the impact of found malfeasance in a politicians in voter support. So to answer the question, I will study the impact of found malfeasance in a politicians in voter support of his or her candidate in an upcoming election. I will implement a strategy with the help of Transparency International and the Contraloría General de la República, the main audit body to investigate the use of public funds among public administrations, as a random experiment, which replicates the design of the Brazilian 2003 anti-corruption program based on the random auditing of municipal government expenditures. So with a 95% confidence interval, the program or the random experiment will implement a stratified random sampling of 336 municipalities, ensuring 40 municipalities with a female mayor, 40 randomly selected municipalities with a female mayor, and 296 random selected municipalities with a male mayor. To choose a municipality for an audit, a lottery with all possible participants will be rolled, assuring random assignment among groups. Since the audits will be conducted with the help of the Contraloría General, all governments or local governments and municipalities are bound by law to provide all the information needed for the audit, assuring complete compliance. Finally, audits will be conducted on the third year of the term, but results of the audits will be revealed 4 months prior to the local elections to be able to measure, to have the impact of the results being published and the voter turnout. So my identification strategy is the following: to measure if voters have higher standards for women when punishing malfeasance, or as I will call it, the average treatment effect. I will compare the means of voter turnout or support to the incumbent candidate between each treated group and control group, but also specify the interaction of politician gender and the treatment. My main equation will consist of a simple OLS fixed effect model, including the interaction between gender and treatment as follows. The outcome variable yi accounts for the turnout to the incumbent running candidate, while xi beta is a vector of municipality and characteristics that determine electoral outcomes. The equation also accounts for the interaction of the mayor's gender and the treatment, being a dummy not being a dummy, but the amount of malfeasance or corrupt acts found in the audit or the report. And finally, actually implementing the number of violations associated with corruption, which is a variable that Ferraz and Finani in their 2008 evaluation of the Brazilian 2003 program used. And finally, theta to control for municipality characteristics, and an epsilon I to specify the fixed effects. To summarize, my database will be constructed by public records, mainly by public records, specifically election records provided by the Colombian Electoral Office or Registraduría Nacional. Municipal characterization data will be obtained from the Department of National Statistics or DANE, containing information of GDP per capita, percentage of rural and urban population, employment rates, level of education population, and other municipal characteristics. The number of violations associated with corruption by each report on the treated municipalities will be provided by the audit and by the report sent and constructed by the Contraloría General. And since in Colombia, local authorities from the executive branch have one fixed term with no possibilities to re-election, I identify the incumbent candidate as if the mayor is running again, and hence the punish will be received by the incumbent candidate. So we will have to look for each campaign and identify the incumbent candidate manually. In this way, I believe that I will address um, my main question, which is, do voters punish differently? Do women politicians face higher standards? And with this design, we can isolate the effect of gender by controlling for the gender of the mayors in the Colombian municipalities. So if there's any questions, I believe that I can answer it afterwards in the class or in the comment section. So thank you very much, and that's it.